Welcome to UO Today. I'm Barbara Altman, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest today is Michelle Latiolais. She is Professor of English and Co-Director of the Programs in Writing at the University of California at Irvine. Latiolais' novel, Even Now, won the Gold Medal for Fiction from the Commonwealth Club of California in 1991. Her novel, A Proper Knowledge, was published by Bellevue Literary Press in 2008. Widow, a collection of stories published in 2011, was largely written after the tragic death of Latiolais' husband, Paul. In a review, the San Francisco Chronicle characterized Widow as, quote, sublime. Latiolais manages to find something luminous in the broken shards, still sharp, still drawing blood, that remain in the wake of losing what could not feasibly be lost. Latiolais gave a reading from Widow as a guest of the UO's Creative Writing Program on October 13th, 2011. Michelle, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
It's so good of you to speak on camera as well, and that way we can get your voice and your fiction out all across the state of Oregon.
Thank you for
Just
that.
for those who don't come to the reading. This book is dazzling. It's dazzling in a modest, quiet way. You have to immerse yourself into it, and I just spent a lovely weekend day with it. So thank you for producing a book about something that is profoundly female and human. It's partly autobiographical, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk about what part of it actually comes from your own experience?
So there's about 4 stories that I wrote sort of desperately after Paul had died. And because there was a lawsuit over his death too, anything I was writing was being subpoenaed. And I started writing about what I thought to myself was the physiology of grief. I couldn't quite believe what my body was going through, and so I started just trying to capture that in words. Years ago, I read Ellen Scarry's book, The Body in Pain, and she sort of says, well, you know, words can never really capture physical pain, and I always sort of took that as a challenge anyway, and so there are about 4 pieces that were written, just trying to map what was going on in my body, and just to, I think in some ways the writing was to distance it too, you know. So.
Your heroines in this, your female first-person voices, are very intensely connected to their bodies. The corporeal aspects of grief are one of the things that really rises off the page, and the pain of grief is almost palpable here. I can see that it would be quite a trick to turn that into words, though.
Well, yesterday I was talking with some students, and I said, I'm not one of those people that believe, words are kind of, they can never quite capture things, and they're only sort of imperfect and imprecise. And maybe it's I grew up with a mother also who you didn't say plant or flower, you said Diefenbachia, or you said Dracaena, that idea that there was a word for almost everything. But of course, what writing like this is trying to capture is really the ineffable. And something that it's very hard to capture, but I just do have this belief in language as being perception also. So, I also was writing quite desperately, and so I whether it was hard or not, I don't know. Everything was hard at the time, So I just set out to do it.
That aspect of everything being hard comes through so clearly. These women, first-person characters, are struggling just to get out of the house, simply to make a doctor's appointment, to run an errand, to prepare a house for guests. It makes it clear that in that acute grief, it's really hard to deal with the world. So you're saying, if I understood you correctly, that writing this was one of your ways of dealing with the world?
Absolutely, and it was something that, I think have this profound belief that if you can make something in the world, it might be better, if you can make a meal for somebody, at least it might be better, if you can make something with your physical hands, and your mind, and it's not as destructive, that's progress. That's a good thing. I think that's something we probably lost, is that belief in making things with our hands. So, which I think of writing as something we make with our hands. Our minds too, of course. But so yeah. I mean, it definitely. I don't think writing is therapy. I don't think it's self-expression. But this was obviously something I desperately, needed to do too,
And was it satisfying having made something with your hands and your brain? Did you feel like it served that function, like your character who's ironing napkins, many napkins? Did it serve the purpose that you hoped it might?
That's from Breathe, and that was written long before Paul died, and and it's funny. I mean, now put in the context of the collection, it reads very differently, I think. And but I do think when you lose the care of the body that you love most in the world, that is an incredible loss. And I don't think we think that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we think of these big things that when we lose somebody, then we love, but I don't think we think that you're going to miss peeling carrots for his lunch. You don't think of something that small, and yet you do. So in something that's not been published yet, I write that others are the syntax of our lives, they're the grammar of our lives, and nothing makes sense without them. And I think that's right.
That's a great sentence. That's a wonderful analogy.
If I could just get that published. So
it's the syntax and the grammar of our lives. That really is the dynamic pieces of community, of being in relation to people. I wanted to talk about the architecture, the sort of structure of this collection a little bit. You mentioned that Breathe was written well before Paul died. You also told me earlier, before we began taping, that the collection was not your idea.
No.
How did it come about?
Erica Goldman, who is the editor for Bellevue Literary Press, who published A Proper Knowledge, and one of her books has just been nominated for the National Book Award, so I'm very excited about that. So she called a couple of summers ago and said, Michelle, how many stories do you have? And I said, well, I don't know. And so she said, kind of sharply, well, could you count? So I said, yeah, okay, so and she said, call me back. So I got off the phone, and I was a little grumpy about it because I had to go dig out all these files and stuff like that, And so I called her back, and I said, well, there's 13 or 14 things here, but this is a total stew. There's no way that any of these things go together. And I've been writing them over a number of years. And she said, well, I don't really believe that. I'm not going to take your word on that. So she's a little tiny, very tough little person and wonderfully tough. And so I said, well, okay. She said, I want everything in an electronic file. So I said, okay, well, I'll have my assistant try to do that. And then I wrote Hoarding and Gut and Burqa for the collection. But it was her idea. And then the ordering of the pieces became very interesting, how to order them. And the final ordering was an assistant in Bellevue's. His name is Leslie Hodgkins, who felt very, very strongly about the way these stories should be ordered and that how they would work, how they would inform each other if they were ordered correctly.
You acknowledge that in the book.
Yeah.
It's in the Acknowledgements. Yeah. And what did you think of it once it had been ordered according to Leslie's sensibilities?
Yeah. Well, first, I gave it to Elizabeth Talent because I said, I'm very flattered. This is really wonderful, but I don't think this will work. And I think it'll be confusing, too, because there's different... I'm not a good genre wonk, but there's different genres here, in a way, say, for lack of a better word. And so Elizabeth Talent took and sort of said, these are boys over here. This is widow over here. This is women over here. And she ordered it in such a way that I could actually see that there were thematic connections. And then when that ordering was sent to Leslie, Leslie was one who felt very strongly that was not the right ordering. And but Elizabeth's ordering convinced me they could all go together, that they would not squabble like children, And then Leslie put them in this order. But I hadn't finished Gut and Burqa and Hoarding, and then I inserted those. So, but no, I mean, I owe a tremendous amount to Leslie and Erica on this.
One of the things that struck me reading it is that I was pulled from story to story by the difference in tone. Mm-hmm. Some of them are just heartbreaking, and some of them are almost frightening because they're almost a pathology of grief. And then there are those that are much more observations of contemporary conduct, funny bits. Gut is really an entertaining story. So there is this rolling rhythm that takes you up and down and up and down, and it certainly got me from one end to the other very quickly. I'm assuming that you might have had some hesitations about those differences in tone at first, but now you see it as working?
You know, in a way, I've just stood to the side and said, you know, there are things here that people who care deeply for me are seeing, and I think I need to trust my crew here. And I did.
And it worked.
And I think it does seem to have worked, yeah, because I think I was also incapable of, you know, there are these things that I call involutions, which pink is an involution, breathe is an involution, and when I take a word and I start with one meaning of the word and I fold back in the writing like a nautilus shell and come out another meaning of the word, same word. And I kind of, you know, those I kind of was inventing, you know, years ago and playing around with, but I didn't think that they went with any of the more autobiographical things. So yes, I guess, you know, who am I to argue?
I think you had the good sense to pay attention to people who were looking at this with great perception about how it might fit together. Your emphasis on language is fascinating to me, and it comes out in almost every review of this collection. You do meditations on language in this book, and in fact, I'd like to ask you if you would be prepared to read. I noticed when I was reading the story called The Legal Case that there was this wonderful long run-on sentence that I think goes for 39 lines of print before it comes to an end. It passes from one page all the way around to the bottom of the next. And it is a close observation of a young man talking with his partner at a cafe. Would you be good enough to read that?
Absolutely. Thank you. Absolutely.
That'd be great.
Should we say that she's pregnant?
The young woman at the table.
Yes. It comes out, I guess, in this. But
and could you just tell us a little bit about the woman observing first? She is obsessed with a legal case.
You're right. When Paul, my late husband, was in law school, we'd be in bed reading, and he'd be reading legal cases, and I'd be reading, and then he would lean over and go, "Listen to this," you know, and he would read me some of these cases, and when he read me, you know, and often in legal cases there's just a little bit of story. You know, you only have what's dispositive legally. You don't have a whole lot of things that any writer would say, well, what about this, and what about this, and what about this? So he read this to me, and then I sort of turned to him and said, I can't take that, you know. And the case was a man who met up with his ex-wife, who was about 6 or 7 months pregnant, and he says, I'm going to kick that baby out of you, and he basically does. He knees her so hard that it actually crushes the skull of the fetus. He can't be prosecuted for murder because in those days the definition of life was that you had to be born. Right, so she's thinking about that legal case, and it really is working on her. So
she's observing another couple, a young man and his pregnant companion or wife.
Yeah. And so much on the other end of the spectrum too, which is what's saving her, in a way, thinking about this horrible case, you know. The man props his foot on the spindle of the cafe chair, and thus his knee comes to just below his chin, because he is leaning forward toward a woman he finds enthralling. The young woman watching can read this from every momentary tableau the man folds into, folds out of, his foot finding its way back to the floor, his back even more tilted toward his wife. He is animate with love of her, his arms now laid across the table, both palms resting open right beneath her face, his head tilted to her, smiling, talking through the smile, his words continuous, his body is draped across the table to her, but now instantly rampant. He is talking to the waiter, ordering something. The young woman watching cannot tell as yet what. The waiter vanishes, and the man's shoulders swoop down again toward the table, and he rests his head on his arm. But then he raises his head and brings the hand of that arm and tucks it beneath his ear, so that he's now resting on an elbow, talking the entire time, his eyes cast out toward the street, then at her, a finger stiffening from his other hand, pointing. She is laughing, accused, and the finger waggles a bit in the air, and his foot is once again propped on the chair rung, his knee up close to his chin, close to her belly. They are seated so near to each other, they are both laughing, and his body straightens, slowly, quickly, like time-lapse photography, a flower stalk emerging up out of the ground, sword-shaped leaves flaring away from the stalk, shooting outward, the flower bud forming, furled, now unfurling, blossoming. His body is so completely in thrall to hers, the fine camber, a pregnancy beneath her white trapeze dress, a pearl within the bivalve, which is both their bodies, a desire so physically realized he can barely keep himself from the appetite that is his life with her now, in these days, a hunger so happily hunger, and oh God, yes, in every conjugation of his body, again and again and again, it is becoming, it will be, he is in her body, he has not touched her once, though all of his body is of one verb. The young woman watching can see this, one verb.
Well, it's a pretty stunning sentence.
Thank you.
And I have to say, your book is the only book where I've actually found a form of the noun involution 3 times in the same collection. But I understand now that is part of your process and part of the way you use language.
Right.
Now, one of the things that's surprising to me in the book is, and I don't know why it surprises to me, but I think it's because it's bold, there is an unapologetic, very frank sensuality, eroticism, a real interest in and concern with a kind of carnal experience of living with a mate, a partner, and then suddenly having that body gone. It's about bodies, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Well, I don't know why we don't talk about the creatural more, you know, that we are creatures, and when you lose the creatural, you know, just a body that you slept beside for 18 years, that just, you know, that sort of physical ocean that's always there in your ear is gone, you know. So I mean, it's interesting to me, people say, well, I've never seen that written before, and it's like, really? You know? So I don't know that I sort of thought I was writing anything that hadn't been written 1,000 times. So other than I was really trying to capture just the resounding emptiness that was suddenly in my life, you know. And also I just felt that half of my mind was gone. Paul was, he had a PhD in British Romanticism. He was a philosopher. He had a master's in philosophy. He'd gone to law school. He was, you know, top 3% of his class. He was a brilliant, brilliant mind, and just fun to talk to, always fun to talk to. And there was always this kind of great dynamic exchange between us, and I felt like half of my mind had gone when he died, you know.
Right, half of the conversation was missing.
Totally.
Yes,
totally.
a very rich conversation, obviously.
Yeah.
I noted that you do not shy away from the difficult topic. Your earliest book was about autism.
Yeah.
And
the second book.
I beg your pardon.
Right,
the second book was about autism and the practitioner who tries to help autistic children.
Right.
You wrote a play called Blue Light about the death of 2 young men, 2 boys in a mine. Yeah. Do you deliberately wade into what we have trouble sometimes articulating? Does it appeal to you for a reason?
Well, I do think it's important to write about things that are important, I guess, you know, that have gravitas, but not necessarily. I mean, I love to laugh, and, you know, I don't know, I was just talking with students saying, I don't think we get to choose necessarily the way we write, and maybe we don't even get to choose our material, but that learning to become a writer is learning to accommodate the way we write. So I just think there's something there that I need to write into, you know. So this material, I would have given anything in the world to not have this material, you know. But obviously there's something there about, you know, hardship or the struggle to be heard, the struggle to communicate, you know, that I obviously eddy around, you know, a lot. You know.
What I think one of the things it translates into is a complete absence of resignation to grief. there's not one of these widows or people experiencing a loss is resigned to it in any kind of a passive way. There's a sort of a fierceness of grief that I think is actually picked up by this beautiful cover illustration of the woman with her armed gloves and holding the sword. It's almost as though one is doing battle with grief.
You know, I'm so, this sounds odd. I mean, I don't want these things to happen to anyone, and this is bad luck for this to happen to Paul, but I've been incredibly lucky with the people who surround me, and my sister sent me this from the Morgan Library, a picture of this, and of this tarot card of the Queen of Swords, and she'd just written on it, I mean, Paul was, you know, dead maybe a few weeks, and she wrote on it, and she said, this is you. You're very vulnerable, and you're very strong. And you hang on to those things because you need the people around you to reflect you back more than at any point in your life, because you are so lost, and you don't know anything. There's no meaning left. And so I was surrounded by people who were able to reflect me back. Accurately, inaccurately, I don't know. It helped me, though, tremendously. So this was my sister sending me a lifeline, with this and the Queen of Swords. And but plenty of days I would have happily given it all up. So,
Well, she got it right, exactly right, didn't she? And it must be quite gratifying for her to see this beautiful image turn up as the cover of your book. Do you have any thoughts about, or have you consciously rejected our understanding of the classic stages of grief as a kind of progression?
I don't know. I don't know what the classic stages of grief are. I know that there's writing out there about it, but a lot of books on suicide were given to me, and I tried to read some of them, and they weren't making any headroads into me with respect to things that would help me. And so I said to somebody, this doesn't make any, I don't know, it's not about grief. And somebody said to me, the best writing on grief is in books on divorce. And I thought that was one of the most interesting things. I didn't go in search of those books. But I know that there's a lot of actual grief studies, but what I was more interested in was what was happening to the physical body. I mean, I write about not being able to breathe, and that's just true. I could not breathe. So I was much more interested, actually, in what was happening cellularly, and maybe there's work out there, but I don't know.
You were deliberately not engaging with it. You were interested in a different sort of effect of the ravages of grief. Yeah.
Well, at the same time, I was also researching what I was very sure had caused my husband's death. So I was in the biomedical library many, many days, many, many hours. So.
I see. You were immersed in questions of physiology and physical response. Right. Did that lead to something satisfying for you? Did you find what you were looking for?
I found it, but it's not satisfying. But at least the FDA on June 8th has further restricted 80 milligrams of Zocor, has further, put checks on this dosage. So we know what we know. It doesn't bring anybody back. So.
But it's an important piece.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So.
I wanted to get back to something as we draw to a close. Yeah. You said that you tell students in writing seminars, or did just on this visit, that writers have a characteristic voice and they need to pay attention to how they write and what they write about. Yeah. What other wisdom do you have to communicate to them after a 20-year and very successful career? Your work is very highly praised.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I don't have any general advice about writing. In fact, I always tell them I have no general advice about writing, but other than one thing, if you really want to do this, you should marry money. So, because I really try as carefully as I can to read each individual page in front of me and to see what is happening there, what is the gold there, So and so I'm very resistant to sort of generalized wisdom, but I do think that part of saying, look, I think you have to come to accommodate your voice. I don't think you get to choose, you know, completely. You know, you get to work hard. You get to choose to work very, very hard, and you get to choose to become obsessive about this. But it is an accommodation process, because the way you hear and the way you put language together, that's maybe an intricate sort of orchestration of every sentence you've ever read in your entire life, you know. So, so I don't have a lot of general wisdom about writing, other than you need to read a lot, I think, you know. So.
Well, one of the things that I think is going to set a splendid example is just that this is really bold writing. It's really just sort of in your face about the physical ravages, and about just, you're very frank in your writing, and I think that in itself is going to set a great model. We're almost out of time. Do you have a minute to tell us about any ongoing projects or future work?
Well, I do have the memoir about, or it's a chronicle about what happened to Paul. And then I've been writing news stories. I've been trying to write about what happened after June 8th, when the FDA further restricted Zocor, was that I became enraged all anew. And so I've been trying to write about anger, which is another very unacceptable thing to write about, or to write, right? I think that we have some wonderful angry writers. John Edgar Wideman is a wonderful angry writer, and I think he's not recognized because he's angry, and it makes you uncomfortable to read it. But that's probably very important, you know. Anger is something we need to not bury. I think that really leads to pathology when we bury our anger. I don't think you should go get a gun and act out on that anger, but if you can make something of it, that's a good thing. So I've been trying to write about anger, and what do you do with it? So.
And what form will it appear in, very quickly?
I have
do
two
we
stories.
know? Two stories.
Thus far. Who knows what that'll become? You know?
Your editor will be calling
Erica
you
will
soon.
be telling me, yes, what to do with them. You know?
And when there are 13 of them, perhaps
exactly.
we'll have another volume.
Yeah, so.
Michelle, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was a real pleasure from start to finish.
Appreciate it.
We've been speaking with Michelle Latiolais, Professor of English and co-director of the programs in writing at the University of California at Irvine. She is the author of Widow. Latiolais gave a reading on October 13th, 2011 as a guest of the UO's Creative Writing Program. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.